Welcome back to the Crypto Corner. Today I've got a different treat for you. Today I'm going to show you important parts of the Bitcoin code that might be of interest to you. I mentioned a few things already during the Halving event, but today we're going to dive a little bit deeper. But don't worry, not too deep. Back in 2008, a gentleman, lady, team, nobody knows, in the name of Satoshi Nakamoto, published the white paper and started already developing, coding his idea. And January 2009, he sent an email to a few friends asking for support. And this is the first email that he sent around with a link to what he had developed until then, mentioning already the 21 million coins and the halving that's happening all the 4 years. And a gentleman called Halving, who unfortunately passed away a few years ago, started supporting him. He thought that idea was great. And that's how the dream started. These days it's a little bit more complex than it was back in those days. And so if we look at the Bitcoin Core repository, you go to github.com/Bitcoin and then you click on Bitcoin. And that's where you'll have all the files that are currently being worked on and that are currently being used. But I'll come back to that in a second because I want to show you also the beginnings. That didn't start in GitHub because they didn't use GitHub back in 2008, 2009. I think they started using it 2010. So somebody was so kind and put those files on GitHub. And this is the first repository that Satoshi coded himself, November 2008, only 3 files. So you've got the main CPP. CPP stands for C++. So this is the code that Satoshi coded himself, programmed himself. Now, as I mentioned, these days are a little bit more complex, thousands of files, documentation, and the reason being is that it's in itself a very complex system that has to be secured by all means. So we've got 700 contributors since the early days and over 24,000 changes, either additions, deletions, to the documentation or to the code. Now, talking about the interesting parts, we go into a subdirectory called src. And in here, the first file that we're going to take a look at is called amount.h. It's a very small code only, program only. And in here, we've got the famous 21 million. It's hard-coded in the system. And also 100 million coins is equal 1 Bitcoin. Now we call what Satoshi called a coin, we call that a Satoshi these days. So 100 million Satoshis or Toshis is equal 1 Bitcoin, but that, as you can see, is hard-coded in the system. Another interesting file is chainparms.cpp, and that's the first file that if you copy and you want to start your own blockchain, that's the first file that you will start working with because many variables are defined in here. And there are also 3 networks mentioned in here. So you've got the main network. That's a network that's currently being used out there. By around 80% of the nodes are using the Bitcoin Core network. And so that's the main one. Then you've got the test one where things are being tested without having an implication on the main network. And then you have got the regression test, which is the same as a test network, but mines are blocked immediately, so you don't have to wait the famous 10 minutes. Talking about other hard-coded things, we've got here in the main block hard-coded the Genesis block, so the first block that was ever mined, it was mined by Satoshi himself. That's hard-coded in here. It has to be that way so that the network because everything is based on that first Genesis block. So if I go into blockchain.com/explorer and I enter 0 because 0 is the first block that was ever mined, I click on search. I click on Bitcoin because that's the chain that we're looking at the moment. And this is the first block that was mined by Satoshi. And as you can see, the reward at that time was 50 Bitcoin per block. So Satoshi himself, they're saying, mined around 1 million, but nobody knows that either. So but just that on the side. So coming back to the chain, chainparms.cpp file, you'll also find here so the parameters for the adjustment of the difficulty. As you know, a few of you had questions around what happens after the halving event that most miners switch off their machines and walk away. Not a problem for Bitcoin, because every 2016 blocks, and that's hard-coded in here, the difficulty is adjusted either upwards or downwards. So if a lot of miners would have left at that day or in that period, then the difficulty would have been adjusted downwards. And every 10 minutes, more or less, a block will be mined as before and as it will be happening in the future. So that's also hard-coded in there. And then another one that I mentioned last time for the halving, I mean, going back to the chain params as you see here, the halving interval is defined in here. By the way, what I like is really that somebody took the time to really define how to name variables. So it's easy to identify and search for them. Yeah, so there's a fantastic search facility up here in GitHub where you can search for these variables. And so you've got in here every 210,000 blocks a halving event will happen. And the calculation itself will happen, as I mentioned during 2 weeks ago. It's in the validation.cpp. And it, as far as I remember, line 1200 something. That's too far. $2,230 something. Here it is. So here you see there will be in total only 64 halvings, because the amount will be then so small that it's not worth calculating anymore. So they automatically set that to 0 after the 64th halving. But in here is the calculation. So the first subsidy was 50 coins, and every 4 years or every 210,000 blocks the difficulty will be adjusted, and here you see that part of the code. Now I might dive into a few other areas next time. I might also or I will explain a little bit more about for those that haven't not seen GitHub, the Bitcoin repository, of what how to read and how to look into those things. So not into the code, but more into the variables from GitHub itself, which is quite interesting. And yeah, I wish you a fantastic week. I hope everything is going well and smooth for you, and see you next week. Thank you very much for watching. Bye.